his religious or her religious freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Espen, and thank you, all of you. Quite massive input, a lot to think about, and a lot to discuss, I think. Together you've helped us already understand also that that Europe is diverse and that Islam is diverse, and perhaps also that Christianity is diverse, and that those are some things that need to underlie the rest of our conversation. Imam Masroor, I think you found a lot of support among the other panelists, a lot of appreciation of what you shared. But in order for this to be a discussion, let me try to pick up something that could be attention, taking the cue from Linda's bringing up feminist thinking within Islam. And she also said that perhaps Norway is among those countries in the world where feminist ideology has the strongest position. In your talk, you underlined that this compatibility, and in some questions you went into detail, but in many questions you were on a general level, naturally. But what would you say to those who say that, yes, it's good that Islam in principle is compatible with ideals many Europeans have, but when it comes to gender, to family, we have some problems with that. Isn't that sort of an area where tensions arise, where mainstream Islam may not be so compatible with many of the values that other Europeans hold dear? What do you say to that?
I like the challenge, it's good. It creates a bit more a discussion and a debate. You see, I often ask people, show me where in Islam do you find gender inequality? In Islam, as opposed to in Muslims. There's a slight difference between the two. There's a very famous saying of a great writer who said, don't judge Islam by the behavior of Muslims. Judge Muslims by the yardsticks of Islam. So if you can show me where in Islam there is gender inequality, then I can of course focus on that particular issue and talk about it. I know Muslim societies in different contexts, in different countries, in different places, are very gender biased, unequal, misogynist, degrading. I find it absolutely unacceptable. And I face it every day as an imam in my local mosque. When I say I face it, I face the mindset that people could still think like that. In fact, I saw somebody here in this very country who had resorted to being violent towards his wife. And I was very angry in my response to them, saying, how dare you do that? Because I know, under no circumstances, would I ever support such a behavior. So I want to make that distinction. I don't believe Islam provides gender inequality. Muslims, however, for many reasons, may have become, and are in many cases, misogynist, unequal, and all sorts. And they have reasons such as culture, such as hundreds and hundreds of years of pre-Islamic traditions and practices that they have inherited and they've kept on, misunderstanding of the faith, all sorts. But I am still baffled by this suggestion from many of my non-Muslim friends who say Islam provides an equal or inequality between man and woman. What Islam provides is a very clear, defined partnership between man and woman. The Arabic word used in the Quran is Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahunna. They're your an analogy of garment has been used. They're your garment and you're their garment. And garment is a very important analogy for the Muslim mind, at least the way we understand it. When you think about a garment, it sits right on our skin. It knows no difference. It knows everything about me. There is no competition between me and my garment. If my partner, my relationship, my wife, and me to her, we are mutual garments, God is using the same terminology. There is a long verse, the believing man and the believing woman, the practicing man and the practicing woman, the sacrificing man and sacrificing woman, the obedient man and obedient woman, the devotional man and devotional woman. God goes in great length to remind every characteristics and quality of a successful believer in detail, but saying man and woman, man and woman, man and woman, at the same breath almost in one verse. So textually speaking, and the life of the Prophet, if you look at it, you will find gender equality at its best. Did Islam eliminate gender inequality in every society? It couldn't. Just like in the West, we still haven't overcome domestic violence in many homes. Every day, one woman dies at the hands of somebody that they love by being brutally murdered, and it happens in the middle of us in Europe today. So we can't eradicate every ill of a society, but we have to do everything possible to say it's intolerable. Zero tolerance towards that behavior. So we create a yardstick, a benchmark, we have laws to make sure we enforce it, we have society that we train and educate, so we eliminate it. But unfortunately, in many Muslim societies, they haven't done it yet. And I believe, if they become democratic and free, if they have the opportunities, they will eliminate it, because it's against their own interest. Gender inequality is against your own interest.
Thank you. Linda, you identified yourself as an Islamic feminist. Are you as optimistic about the future of Islam in Europe when it comes to this particular topic?
I'm optimistic, but I don't think that we can solve the problems without actually going to the problematic texts. And there are verses in the Quran that are normally read as hostile against women. It's the right of a man to punish his wife, and these are concrete examples of how to do it, like to beat her or to put her in house arrest. The right of a man to have 4 wives. It's hard to say that is gender equality when the women are not allowed to have the same. The right of a Muslim man to marry Christian and Jewish women, and not the same right for the Muslim woman. 2 female witnesses for 1 male witness. And also one of the most practical problems regarding the traditional Islamic laws that are not practiced formally, but they are practiced informally in the West or in Europe, is the right to divorce. So there is a lot of women who are struggling to get their divorce, so they are kind of caught between 2 legal systems. I guess that's easier in the UK because they have actually judges who can do something about this problem. But for example, in Norway, that's a kind of a common problem. So I think we have to go also to the sources, because they are the one that Muslims are depending on. The Quran and the Hadith, and I totally agree that there are so many interpretations that also say the opposite, that there are equality between the sexes, and that and in front of God they have the exact same worth. But in practical life, there are no doubt that the traditional interpretations are is not gender equal.
Slightly unauthentic, if I was to be polite in responding to you, in the sense that it's misreading often, that you have just acknowledged, amongst many Muslims that lead them to such interpretation. And of course, you would agree, if you do the survey of Muslim population, both in Europe and Muslim world, I would say more than 90% of them know very little about their faith, intellectually speaking. They may have been born in a Muslim family, they may have gone to an elementary school to learn basics of Islam, but in true essence, they haven't become what Quran requires them to become, which is conscientious, learned, critical thinking Muslims. That's what Quran wants us to be, because that's what God says in the Quran. The whole notion of Iqra defines that particular paradigm. So I agree with you that there are bad practices within Muslims, and that needs to be eliminated. There are misreadings of the text, and you referred to some elements of how Salafis were becoming very prominent in Norway. If they came here, Salafis have a bigger pulling power than you and I have. There has to be a question mark as to why is it that the Salafis are pulling more people than we are. You see, young people flock to Salafi conferences and conventions. I don't want to call them Salafi conventions and conferences. I'm going to call them more scholars who appear more traditional in their appearances and in their language. The reason why they appear to those programs or in those programs is because those scholars speak clearly and directly. Young people are sick and tired of the cultural confusion that they see their mosques and their imams often regurgitating. An example I'll give you. In Norway, we have 22 or 25 imams who came to our meeting the other day. Not all of them saw eye to eye with me on many issues when it comes to religious interpretation. An example, reverence of the Prophet. How much should you revere the Prophet? There are certain Muslims within Norway who run the mosques. Their interpretation of reverence of the Prophet, in my view, would be tantamount to associating partners with God, which is shirk. But as far as they're concerned, that's what makes who they are. Young people are sick and tired of that. They want one God. They want clear answers from Quran and the sayings of the Prophet. They don't want this cultural mambo-jumbo. So when traditional scholars come and they speak clearly, cutting aside the cultural nuances, they speak with faith and belief as precise and provide evidences to their approach and appear intellectual. Of course young people will flock to it. Why would they come to a woolly liberal like me? As far as they're concerned, oh yeah, everything is alright for him. There is no clear defined black and white. Remember, everyone prefers black and white, especially if they like comfort. So I'm not surprised that Salafis are attractive. But I'm not going to justify that. That's going to change, Linda, when Muslim masses become intellectually enlightened. And I put it down to that. I say Muslim masses are not intellectually enlightened, but Islam is perfectly enlightened, and that's why Islam is compatible to Europe. And Muslims, when they find the space in Europe to become intellectually enlightened, they will too become compatible to European way of life and lifestyle. And that mutual relationship would strengthen both Muslims and Europe, I believe, and hopefully pave the way for the Muslim countries to share the same wonderful enlightened experience as we are together enjoying in this part of the world. So that's my way of thinking. Though I see the problematic text when people are misinterpreting them, I sit there and cringe thinking, hey, I don't read that. Where did you get that from? How did you come to that conclusion? What can I do if the entire discourse is not based on intellect, but irrational, emotional victimhood that they hold on to? I can't really do much about it.
Thank you. I think too many debates about Islam in Europe focus only on gender, and I brought it up on purpose first, but I don't want us to continue only on that topic. There seems to be, in your presentation and in all the presentations here, a sort of tension between a normative Islam, the Islam that we would like to understand to be the right, true Islam, and then some descriptions of other forms of Islam that are inauthentic or different or misreadings. I want to invite others to ask questions in a few moments, so I'll ask you to try and be relatively brief, Imam, when you answer. In a few words, what would be your main strategy to make the Islam that you have presented to us to be the dominant form of Islam, or the dominant way of thinking among European Muslims?
You want one word?
I do.
Knowledge. Now, let me elaborate that, because you're probably thinking, what do you mean? If Muslims were truly knowledgeable about their faith, they will embrace the same approach to Islam that I presented. Take the example of the Prophet. A very beautiful example. I always quote this. A Bedouin man from the desert came to see the Prophet. Out of the blue, very crass, unsophisticated, ill-mannered, screamed at the Prophet, "You, O Muhammad!" "Yes, you! Who are you?" he said to the Prophet. This is the Prophet of God. Muslims are revering, companions are around, all quite vexed by his behavior. He just says to them, "Come down, it's okay, let him talk." "Who are you?" He said, "I am Muhammad ibn Abdullah. I am Muhammad, the son of Abdullah." That's all he said about himself. Nothing more. No pomposity, no self-aggrandizement, nothing. Just about his name. Then the man said, "Okay, you're Muhammad, the one who's causing so much trouble. Please tell me about your religion that you preach." And Prophet Muhammad gave him an introduction in 10 seconds. He gave him an introduction to Islam in 10 seconds. That's what he said. And I'm going to read the verse to you. If you want to mark the time it takes for me to read the verse, starting from, say, just 1 second now. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ. That took me 8 seconds. It took me 8 seconds to recite a verse that Prophet read in return to the response to that question. Tell me about Islam. So Prophet was able to cut through all the rubbish and give the guy the true message of Islam in 8 seconds. Why are we failing? Because we have become so confused about the simplicity of this message. The simple message the Prophet said, and God orders you. He says, God orders me, the believers, to be just. Adl, ihsan, to follow excellence. وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى, be benevolent and kind and compassionate to people around you. 3 orders. Justice, excellence, and benevolence. And then God prohibits you from doing 3 things. Fahsha, evil. Fahsha is shamefulness. Munkar is evil. And baghi, that which causes social destruction. So he gave 3 orders and 3 prohibitions. The man said, "Wonderful, I'm gone." That was the simplicity of Prophet's message. You go to a Muslim today and ask him about Islam, or her about Islam, they'll give you a huge narrative you won't even understand. In fact, most Muslims don't even know this story that I've just said. I can do a survey right now. Those Muslims who are in this room, put your hands up if you know the saying of the Prophet. Only 2. 3 people know out of a lot of Muslims. But it is true that most of us don't know much about the truth of our message. So I'm saying knowledge is the response. Knowledge is the response.
Thank you. In a few moments, I want to see hands among the audience. I have a question for Espen first, though. It's about, we see here, we had a panel of a Jew, 2 Muslims and a Christian sitting together, agreeing on a lot of different issues. I'm thinking only exactly 25 years ago, the Pope John Paul II visited Norway, and many conservative Protestant Christians stayed away from celebrations. Even a number of bishops of the Church of Norway stayed away because the relationship between Lutherans, Protestants and Catholics was so tense, even only 25 years ago. Today, Christians from all these denominations sit together on ecumenical councils and committees and cooperate and don't really find there's a lot of difference between them. Will the same be the case with Christians and Muslims in 25 years from now? Is there an ecumenical movement that includes all the Abrahamic religions, the people of the book, as the Imam spoke about?
That's a good question. And I would say that I think that the main reason for so much hostility, also among Christians 25 years ago, was due to isolation. I remember very well that when I was 10 years old or something like that, my mom came to me and told me that the person that teaches me to play the piano, she was going to marry a Catholic man. And that was something very strange where I lived. everyone was Lutheran, although there was some Pentecostals. Today, as the Jew said before he left, we live in a very pluralistic society. And I think it's a very nice and perfectly normal situation that when we live in a pluralistic society and meet with people from other religions, from other cultural backgrounds, and when it comes to Christian denominations, there are also a much more pluralistic situation. We will find out that there are so much we have in common. And I think that's really nice, that's really good. But although I agree with the Imam in so many questions, especially when we talk about values, I guess there are big differences when it comes to some of our core beliefs. We think differently about Jesus, about salvation. And in some areas of my life, that is complicated. It means that it's difficult for me to invite him to preach in my congregation. But what we see here this evening is not about praying together or having a kind of a religious meeting, but we are talking about what happens in a society, and in that context I think it's just fine, and it's really important that we are building bridges.
Thank you. We have a conversation going. I want to include the audience now. I've seen one or two hands. We already see that we have not more than 20 minutes left. I want to let some of you speak. I can promise that it will not be probably for everybody, and it will not be fair, but I'll go around with the microphone and pick out some of the hands that I see. But do raise your hands high up so I can see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for informative lectures. Imam Ajmal, when you were asked and you were challenged by Hinda on some questions, and when you answered, it sounds to me in a very typical way of putting aside the actually addressing the challenge. This is what the Salafis Imams do in the same way when they want us to understand the real Islam, perfect Islam. And when you were answering this question, you said that most of the Muslims, they do not know the actual Islam, they're not very perfectionist. Don't you think it is a wrong way of expecting the perfectionism among the Muslims to be compatible in the European society? And I think that when you were asked a question about inequality, gender inequality, and many other issues, there are a lot of other issues in the democratic liberal Europe which the Muslims have to answer. Don't you feel that it is the responsibility of the Imams to say that, okay, we have not addressed these issues, we have not addressed these apprehensions which the younger generation of the Muslims are showing? This is one question. Instead of referring back to the past, referring back to so and so on, and saying that Muslim doesn't have the knowledge, as you say, how many Muslims do know the sayings of the prophets in Islam. I didn't raise my hand upon because I think I do know some of the sayings of the Prophet, but maybe not enough. But don't you think it is the wrong way of saying that we have to be the perfectionist to be compatible in Islam, in Europe? The other question which you were talking...
We'll take only one question.
Yeah, but next, let me say, just comment on the Salafis. Salafis, you were saying that they are gathering more people. Salafis are getting more people when one Imam is coming. It is because I think all the Salafis in Norway are going there While majority of the people who actually maybe support you, who are your followers, maybe they're at home, only few of them are coming. So this is the difference. Don't let it be that Salafis are having more support in Norway than the common Muslims. Thank you.
Well, I cannot comment about the Salafi and the realities of Norway. You know better than I do. I'm just assuming on the back of what Linda said. If Salafis are having a pulling power, I'm asking you, why do they have the pulling power? And you need to obviously analyze that. This is your home. But the question that you raised about answering all the questions, I was just concerned about time. I want a discussion. I don't want to dominate the entire discussion to one topic. It would be unfair on everybody for me to go through every single text of the Quran, every single verse that relate to every single subject my sister Linda has raised. I would love to do that, but I just don't have the time today. Trust me, in my mosque where I lead prayers, these issues I address quite openly. And if you go onto YouTube and find out some of the khutbahs that I give, or sermons I give, they deal with these issues directly head on. So I have no problem in addressing them. I'm sorry, I just don't have the time. If you allow me longer time, maybe 4 or 5 hours here, and come with the textbooks, I'll be more than delighted. Trust me, to go through them, because I delight in them. I love them, such a discussion. So next time, maybe inshallah, you can bring the discussion point with the text and we can go through it together. I hope that answers it very briefly.
Thank you. We'll take a couple more questions, collect a couple of questions.
Given the conceptual definition that you used of Islam being a framework, a constant, and Muslims being a variable, and 90% of them being rather incapable of being proper Muslims, wouldn't it have been more accurate to have made this title tonight, Are Muslims Compatible with Europe?
Maybe. And maybe that's what we need to examine. The reality today, you are absolutely spot on. There are 40 million Muslims in Europe. What are we doing as Muslims to become European? Believe you me, I am very strong about this. The inadequacy and failure of Muslims to become European. I always say, talk about it. But the question was, is Islam European? Or is Islam compatible? And I stuck to my question very categorically. Muslims need to rise and smell the coffee. And I'll ask you 3 questions, and you don't need to answer them right now. I say this, and I've asked this question to Muslims in Britain. Do you think you're Norwegian? Truly, do you think you're Norwegian? Or if somebody asks you, where are you from, you say Pakistan first. Just think about it. Second question. Do you accept the Norwegian people as your people? Or do you think Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Somalian, Arab people are your people? And third, are you willing to do everything for the well-being and welfare of Norway? If the answer to those 3 questions is yes, emphatically, then we are compatible. If the answer to those questions are no, then we are not compatible as Muslims. I have accepted Britain as my home, 100%. At the age of 17, I said to my father, I'm English, and he nearly threw me out of my house. I have accepted English people as my people, and I see them as my people, and I feel for them as my people. And I'll do everything possible for the well-being of Britain within my capacity. And now, even more profoundly, I am European. Nobody can take that away from me. I believe I have made that transition. Islam is compatible, I am compatible to Europe. My question to my Muslim brothers and sisters is, are you? And if you are, let's celebrate. And if we are not, then we need to do something about it. And I agree with you. That's the question we need to ask maybe at the next lecture.
Thank you. We have another question here.
Thank you. Sorry, my first question will be directed to Linda. You talked about Islamic feminism, Islam, and all these different discourses. And you talked about you talked about the Islamic issues as problematic and that we have to address them from a feminist point of view. It would be more interesting to know what are your views about including the Islamic voice to challenge the state feminism or the gender agenda within the Norwegian state, so that you have this mutual this mutual input from the Muslim or the believer within a secular state and from the state feminism. So this participatory work would be interesting to know about. The second thing is about knowledge. I think that's true, and there are many researchers who said the same thing, that there is a problem of knowledge. The question would be if you have any suggestions about how a secular state can enlighten the Muslim youth about their faith being, thank you.
Please, Linda first, please.
You know, just the leading authority on gender issues in Islam just walked in the door, so she's much more, she's Lena Larsen, she's much better than this than me. I think we have a huge challenge in general in Norway with young Christian, Muslim, even Jewish, to be interested in taking this gender battle. And I think also that the gender battle between the minority society is maybe not it's not felt so relevant. So there is a gap. And I can understand that like mainstream feminists in Norway are thinking it's kind of hard to, have serious discussion about, such kind of simple things as should a man be allowed to hit his wife? Because this is something that we are done discussing in Norway, it's not so long ago, but at least we have passed it,
Sorry, my concern is about the taking for granted gender equality norms within Norway, to start challenging them, because it's a battle, it's a struggle that is continuous. So, speaking about the Norwegian gender norms to be challenged from a believer's view, so this is a reverse view that I'm interested in.
I definitely wish that more Muslim women were engaged in this. My experience from debating this, especially in social medias and Islamic forums, is that actually Muslim women are more stronger to reproduce patriarchal thinking actually than the Muslim men. So that's a kind of hard frame to work within. When the women themselves, for example, when I am talking to imams about why are not women allowed to use the main entrance at the mosque, and they say for us it's perfectly okay, but they don't want it themselves. So and also other matters that the women themselves, for example, something that I really miss is I see a lot of feminists defend the right of wearing hijab. I don't see so many women who are actually wearing hijab defending the same right for their Muslim sisters to not wear the hijab. So I think also we have to have this, to find some kind of common ground to stand on, and that's a challenge because I think today we don't have it.
And there was a question for you too, but we'll collect a couple
That's
more
fine,
questions.
sounds good to me.
Jeg må si det på norsk da, så prøver kanskje Linda å oversette for meg litt vanskelig å si det på engelsk. Problemet i Europa med islam, at de ser veldig mye blod der og muslimer slakter. Og det står vers i Koranen om det. Og vi har snakket om alt, og vi har hoppet over akkurat den saken der. Så hva han mener om det, hvordan man skal snakke med salafi. Og man kan ikke si de salafi, de har ikke kunnskap, og vi har kunnskap. Det er masse imamer og lærere som har skrevet masse bøker, og de er salafi, så du kan ikke si alle er dumme.
I'm not a good translator, but he asked about, he said that people are concerned about Islam because they see a lot of blood. And he referred to verses in Quran who are also violent. And he said, what do you think about it? And he says there's a lot of Salafi who has written a lot of books about it and they cannot be all stupid.
Yeah, we'll save that too, because we'll take one more over here.
First of all, thank you very much for very inspiring and interesting talks. I myself I'm born and raised in Norway. I grew up in 2 different mosques. My dad's mosque, which was a missionary mosque, that if you read about it today in the newspaper, you would think it's the scariest place. My mullah, when I see him on the street, he comes running to hug me. I used to play hide and seek with him, and there was no reason to misunderstand. It was all very friendly. The other mosque that I went to was known as the Arab Mosque. We used to go on cabin trips. The first time I skied was not at school, it was with the Rabita Masjid, where boys and girls would break dance. I was a very good break dancer. We had competitions. Today, when you read about these mosques, it may seem like they are training camps in the middle of the city center. So my question is, how do we deal with political Islam? We've talked about gender equality, we've talked about Islam's theological compatibility with Europe and European identity, but what about political Islam and the role of certain Muslim countries such as Saudi Arabia and whatever they are exporting to Europe, apart from oil, of course?
Thank you. Shall we start by switching off the oil? No, I'm just joking. I said, shall we stop the oil from being supplied to Europe first? Norway won't have any problem because it has got too much oil already. But believe you me, Britain and many other countries will rather sacrifice democracy and rule of law, and they would rather have relationship with those dictators and despots, because I know they do. For example, when Tony Blair was in power, there was a judge who started a corruption campaign against British Airways' arms export deal with a Saudi prince, and they found huge amounts of bribe that was given to British Airways by the prince in order to, but the other way around, in order to secure the contract. So judge wanted to start a judicial review or some sort of illegal proceeding. Tony Blair intervened and stopped it. He's the Prime Minister at that time. And his excuse was, it's against our national interest. What was the national interest? British Airways